So this is Baruch here at the Tikkun Elevator Kollel. We continue on with our story of our king, King David. Number 17, it says, And the Philistines assembled their camps to war. They assembled at Sochel, which belongs to Judah, and they encamped between Sochel and Azekah, and Ephes Damim. Now all of these places are somewhere around Gaza. The Philistines are the basis of the word Palestine. It was a word that was really enacted in order to remove the concept of Judah or Israel by the Romans going back 2,000 years. So they call it Palestine. That was a Roman word. But it also really is based on the concept of the Philistines. The Philistines were based in Gaza. So here we see the problem in Gaza is a long-term, thousands of years old problem. It says, And Saul and the men of Israel assembled, and they encamped in the valley of the Terebinth, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines were standing on the mountain from here, and Israel standing on the mountain from here, and the valleys was between them. And the champion emerged from the Philistines' camp. His name was Goliath. In Hebrew it's called Goliath, or Goliath, from Gath. It was a place called Gath. His height was 6 cubits in a span. So I don't know how tall that is, but it's tall. So he says, and a helmet of copper was on his head. And he was wearing a coat of mail, in other words, armor. He had armor on him. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of copper. So it's very heavy, but he was very big. And greaves of copper were on his legs, and a copper javelin was between his shoulders. He was completely covered in armor. And the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the spear's head was 600 shekels of iron. And the shield bearer went before him, and he stood and called to the array of Israel, and said to them, Why should you come out to wage war? Am I not the Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose for yourself a man, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, we shall be slaves to you. And if I overcome him and kill him, you shall be slaves to us and serve us. And the Philistines said, I taunt the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man, and let us fight together. And Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, and they were panic-stricken, very much afraid. David was the son of this Ephrathi, man from Bethlehem of Judah, whose name was Jesse, or Yishai. And he had 8 sons, and the man was old in Shaul's time, coming among men. And Yishai's 3 eldest sons, who had followed Shaul, went to war along with Shaul. And the names of his 3 sons who went to war were Eliav, the firstborn, and the second to him Aminadav, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Shaul. Now David went to and fro from Shaul to tend his father's sheep in Bethlehem. So in other words, he was with Shaul, but he had to go back and forth. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself for 40 days. Goliath went before the Jews and taunted them. And Jesse said to David his son, Take now to your brothers an ephah of this parched corn, and 10 loaves of this bread, and rush them to the camp to your brothers. And you shall bring these 10 cheeses to the captain of the 1,000, and you shall see how your brothers are faring, and shall take the tidings of their welfare. Now today in the war that we have in Gaza, Jewish people are making clothing, fixing weapons. The Jewish people at their homes are preparing food for the kids, for the boys, young men, in the soldiers. So he says, and you shall bring these 10 cheeses to the captain of the 1,000s, and shall see how your brothers are faring, and shall take the tidings of their welfare. And Saul and they, and all the men of Israel in the valley of the Terebinth, were at war with the Philistines. And David arose early in the morning, and he left the sheep with a keeper, and he carried off and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the barricade, and the army which was going out to the battle array shouted in the battle. And the Israelites and the Philistines put the battle in array. In other words, they started fighting. Army against army arrayed. And David left the baggage in the hand of the keeper of the baggage, and he ran to the battle array, and he came and greeted his brothers. And while he was speaking with them, behold, the champion named Goliath, the Philistine, from Gath, was coming up from the ranks of the Philistines, and he spoke the same words as before, and David heard. And all of the men of Israel, upon seeing the man, fled from before him, and were exceedingly frightened. And the men of Israel said, Have you seen this man who is coming up? For he is coming up to taunt Israel. And it will be that the man who will kill him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and will make his father's house free in Israel. And David said to the men who were standing before him, saying, What shall be done to the man who slays that Philistine and takes away reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should taunt the ranks of the living God? And the people said to him, So shall be done to the man who slays him. And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's wrath was kindled against David. And he said, Why have you come down? With whom have you left those few sheep in the desert? And I know your impetuousness, and the evil of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the war. And David said, What have I done now? Is it not but a word? And he turned around from him toward another, and he spoke according to the same manner. The people answered according to the former man. Now, I'm not quite sure what that meant. And the words which David had spoke were heard, and they related them before Saul, and he took him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your bondsman will go and battle with the Philistine. And Saul said to David, You are unable to go to the Philistine to battle with him, for you're a lad, you're just a young man, and he is a warrior since his youth. And David said to Shaul, Your bondsman was a shepherd of sheep for his father, and there came a lion and also a bear, and carried off a lamb from the flock. And I went out after him and smote him, and I saved it from his mouth. And he arose upon me, and I took hold of his jaw, and I smote him, and I slew him. Both the lion and the bear had your bondsman slain, and the uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he taunted the armies of the living God. And David said, The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will save me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Go, and may the Lord be with you. And Saul dressed David with his garments, and he placed a copper helmet on his head, and he dressed him with a coat of mail. David girded his sword over his garments, and he did not want to go in them. So all of these things that he put on, he didn't want any of the armor, for he was not accustomed. And David said to Shaul, I cannot go with these. I can't wear all of these things, for I am not accustomed. And David took all them off, and he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth pebbles from the brook, and he placed them in the shepherd's bag which he had, and in the sack of his slingshot was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And the Philistine was continuously drawing nearer to David. He was coming to David too. And the man who bore the shield was before him. And the Philistine looked and saw David, and he despised him. The hate was fuming, for he was a youth, and ruddy, he was all red, with an attractive appearance. And the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his God. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I shall... And I shall to the fowl of the air and to the cattle of the field. And David said to the Philistine, You come to me with spear and javelin, And I come to you with the name of the Lord of Hashem, the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, which you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I shall slay you and take off your head. I shall give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines this day to the fowl of the air and to the beasts of the earth, and all the earth shall know that Israel has a God. And all this assembly shall know that not with sword and javelin does the Lord save, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will deliver you into their hands. And it was. When the Philistine arose and drew closer to David, the David hastened and ran to the battle array towards the Philistine. And David stretched his hand into the bag and took a stone therefrom, and slung it, and he hit the Philistine in his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. David overpowered the Philistine with the slingshot, and with the stone that he smote the Philistine, and drew him and slew him. And no sword was in David's hand. David ran, stood up to the Philistine, and he took his sword, and he drew it from his sheath, and slew him, and with it severed his head. And the Philistines saw that their hero had died, and they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines until they came to the valley and unto the gates of Ekron. And the slain of the Philistines fell on the road of Sha'arim, and up to Gad, and up to Ekron. These are all places in Gaza. And the children of Israel returned from pursuing the Philistines, and plundered their camps. And David took the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem, and his weapons he put in his tent. And when Shaul saw David going out toward the Philistine, he said to Abner, Abner is Aviner. He says the father of the light, of the candle, the general of his army, whose son is this youth, Abner? And Abner said, By your life, O king, I know not. And the king said, You ask who the son is? And as David returned from slaying the Philistine, Abner called him and brought him before Shaul, and the Philistine's head was in his hand. And Shaul said to him, Whose son are you, young man? And David said, The son of your bondsman, Jesse, the Bethlehemite.